right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is our Great Idea Lecture on Truth. I'm April Dye. I'm a professor in the psychology department. I'm also the director of liberal arts and the chairperson of the liberal arts committee, which is in charge of planning and directing all of these Great Ideas lectures that you've been to this year. And this lecture is going to be a little bit different. So far, you have had people come in from actually really around the United States to talk to you about great ideas. Today we're going to hear from some of our very own Carson-Newman professors. We used to do an assignment in LA 101 where you had to interview different professors at Carson-Newman about their perceptions of the different great ideas: truth, courage, justice, all of those things you've talked about hopefully this semester. And you would interview them, write a paper, then do a presentation on it. We don't do that assignment anymore, so you guys should be grateful for that. But instead, what we thought we would do is have something similar to that. We brought the professors to you, and our committee made up the questions, so we really made it very simple for you. All you have to do is sit and listen. So we're going to talk a little bit about truth today. And before we begin, I just wanted to start out by just introducing everybody. So here are the people that we have on the committee. I had a thought earlier, but I didn't have enough time to enact it, that I should have made them all play two truths and a lie and have you guys figure out what was fake about their bio. And actually, I don't even know if they gave me true information in their bio. Maybe they didn't. So but I'll just tell you what they told me, and then we can go from there. So let me grab the sheets here and tell you a little bit about each of the people we have up here. So first, we have Dr. Karina Malavanti. She is one of my colleagues in the psychology department, and she comes to us from Texas. And so she got her PhD from Baylor. And I can't find her sheet right now, so making it difficult on myself. All right, so she is an experimental psychologist with a concentration in memory and cognition. Her research designs include juror decision-making, eyewitness memory, and social justice issues, things like wrongful convictions, racial biases. And so she'll be talking a little bit more about her areas of interest and how truth fits in with this. All right, we also have John McClellan. He has his BA in philosophy from UNC Greensboro. His PhD is in philosophy from UT Knoxville. His area of specialization is in the philosophy of religion, and currently he's interested in issues in the rationality of trust, like the rationality of trusting in God in response to suffering and issues in interpersonal trust. So again, we'll hear more from him as well. This is where a table would have come in handy, huh? Next we have Dr. Chad Earhart. He is a professor of art history. He received his PhD in aesthetic studies from the University of Texas at Dallas. His research focuses on the art of the world fairs of the American South. He's also an artist that combines expressionistic and surrealistic painting with the microcosm world of ants and suggestions of miniature humans. So again, hopefully we'll hear some interesting things from him. And then finally, we have Dr. Patsy Boyce. She is a professor of biology. She went to Berea College in Kentucky, and she got her master's degree in endocrine physiology and a PhD in reproductive and developmental biology at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And she has a really interesting bio that I wish I could read to you because it has a lot of fascinating things. She has been all over the world doing a variety of things. She worked as a clinical embryologist and traveled to Taiwan. She's also traveled to Antarctica. So she's got a lot of interesting things to share with us today as well. So let me go ahead and show you the questions that we are going to ask the panelists to discuss today. And so these are the three questions that I asked them to prepare for us. So we're going to hear a little bit about their ideas of truth as far as how it relates to their own discipline, how they might see truth in their discipline, and then also their own experiences with truth as well personally. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our very first question. And it's going to be a very casual conversation. They're just going to sort of jump in as they have things to share with us. And I hope you can piggyback off of one another too if you'd like to. And I will try to keep us on time because I'm mindful that we have 10:30 classes. I have a 10:30 class I need to get to, so we will try to make sure that everybody sticks to our time schedule. But our first question is, what does truth mean in your discipline? So whoever would like to go first. Hello? Hello? Yeah?
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Malavanti and I am an experimental cognitive psychologist. That means that I use the scientific method in order to answer questions about human behavior and specifically human cognition. And so I'm really interested specifically in how the mind works. And so I thought I'd start off by being really super interactive with you guys and doing a quick experiment. So if you guys could just listen to this list of words, and then I'm going to ask you later if you recall me saying a specific word on the list. Okay? All right, so here we go. Nurse, sick, lawyer, medicine, health, hospital, dentist, physician, ill, patient, office, stethoscope, surgeon, clinic, cure. So think about that list of words for just a few moments. Okay. If you're in my Sci 101 class or COG class, please don't give it away. All right. So who recalled the word lawyer, just by a show of hands? Okay. What about the word physician? Okay. What about ill? What about surgeon? What about doctor? Okay, just a few people. I actually did not say the word doctor, okay? And so this experiment was about false memories. And it's really easy to induce kind of false recollections. And as a cognitive psychologist, that might be a question that I answer. And so we see typically that about 25% of people will say that they heard the word doctor. And so what does that tell us about truth? Well, our brain works in mysterious ways, right? We fill in the gaps of our memories based on semantically related information, right? Based on how we think the world is supposed to be. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next question.
The first question ended up being a little bit different when it got up to the screen. What I had in my email was, do we have any criteria for truth in our discipline? Yeah, that's okay. And believe it or not, in philosophy, I think we actually do have some criteria for truth. We do tend to deal with questions for which it's very difficult to answer definitively and show definitively that we have arrived at the true answer. So questions like, what's the ultimate nature of justice and courage, and do we have free will, and is there a God? You know, there's a lot of smart people who disagree about those questions, and for very different reasons, and it is hard to show conclusively that one side is right. That's not to say that philosophers don't think there are true answers to our questions. I mean, either God exists or he doesn't. You know, there is a true answer. It's just hard to tell. But we do have some criteria for weeding out some proposed answers. And the first, I'm going to share two with you. The first is the criteria of logical consistency. Criterion, I guess I should say, of logical consistency. That is, if you take someone's proposed answer to a question and test it to see if it contains any sort of contradiction. If it does, you can throw it out. So as a quick example, some people might hear that we're talking about truth today, and if they're extreme relativists, they might say, well, that's pointless. There are no truths. Well, that can't be right, because if it were true that there are no truths, there would be a truth, right? So that answer contradicts itself. It's not self-consistent. We throw it out. More often, philosophers are testing sets of beliefs for consistency, where we want to see whether various beliefs we hold could all be true at once. And there, philosophers are very good, I think, at showing that beliefs that we might ordinarily think are consistent actually have some underlying tensions and perhaps even contradictions. And we also tend to be pretty good sometimes at showing that apparent inconsistencies can be resolved, and that is that sometimes people think beliefs are inconsistent, but they're actually not. The second way we can test a belief, and this is a fun one, is we can run it through thought experiments. So in the sciences, they have laboratories that they can set up controls and do something and see what happens. We do something similar in philosophy, but we don't even have to get off of our couch to do it. We construct scenarios, and they can be imaginary scenarios, which again are carefully controlled for certain variables, and then we see what results. So let me give you an example. One philosophical question goes way back to Plato in ancient Greece, is what is the nature of knowledge? In other words, what does it mean to know something? And one obvious answer you might give to that question is to say that, well, to know something is to have the truth, to have truth in your head, so to speak. But Plato came up with a thought experiment to show that that's not correct. And you're going to like this because it has to do with juror decision making. So he says, imagine you're a juror, and let's make it a criminal trial, and you come to the conclusion that the defendant is guilty. But the only reason you come to that conclusion is because you find the prosecuting attorney to be very charming, sort of the Patsy Boyce type. And you're just willing to go along with whatever she says. You're just eating out of the palm of her hand. And so she wants you to believe that the defendant is guilty, and so that's what you do. Well, we can easily imagine that you have truth in your head there. We can imagine that the guy really is guilty. But would we say that you knew he was guilty? Of course not. So that thought experiment shows that our proposed answer, that knowledge is having truth in your head, is not quite right. And Plato, by the way, proposed that the answer to that question is that to have knowledge is to have truth in your head and to have a good reason to think you have truth. And that's what's missing in that juror case. But if I could have one more minute, there are some fun thought experiments, and I'll share one with you that philosophers have come up with to show that even Plato can be wrong. So I have some students here today that quite enjoyed this thought experiment. We'll see what you think. So imagine that you're driving down the road and you look out the window and you see what you take to be a sheep on the hill. Oh, they're laughing back there already. Well, unbeknownst to you, that thing that you're looking at is a very convincing statue of a sheep. So while you had very good reason to think there's a sheep on the hill, it turns out that thing you're looking at isn't a sheep. But also, unbeknownst to you, on the other side of the hill is a real sheep, totally out of your field of vision. So it turns out that you do have a true belief in your head when you think, hey, there's a sheep on that hill. And you have good reason to believe it, which is what Plato said it takes to have knowledge. But I think we'd all agree that you don't really know there's a sheep on that hill. And so that thought experiment, unfortunately, shows that not even Plato's answer to our question was right.
Good morning. Thank you, John. I'm still thinking about Plato. Well, the criteria for truth in art history is very much like what your professors are trying to teach you with this thing that you get tired of hearing about called critical thinking. Basically, you make a truth statement or some kind of statement, thesis, and you have some plausible reasons for making that statement. In art history, like general history, we look at facts, when things were made, and documents somebody wrote about to document the actual time and place and all that. And that's important. You got to have all that. And then also maybe cause and effect. Like in regular history, you'll see some event causes this, and the historian can say, well, this is why it happened. Well, in art history, we do more about influence and pick the things out that are more influential based on their popularity or their impact on society, and oftentimes can look back at someone's teacher or master and then figure out why they made. So essentially we're trying to figure out why something's made. Why did people do this? Why did they make a church in 1300 that would have cost in our day and age $400 billion, or would have taken everything they had? Why was that such a big deal to them? Well, that's the second part of art history. It's not just facts, it's the flavor. And we want, and many times the idea of truth it's very important, because people will make stories about what happened, and these stories, which are hopefully are plausible and believable, expand why people made certain things and keep the story going. So in other words, that you'll say Claude Monet painted these beautiful water lilies, and he was an abstract painter at that time, or at least he was veering towards abstraction. But also he had a psychological reason. He was an old man. He dealt with lots of death in his family. There was grief. right? And so you verify those things by letters he wrote, that kind of thing. But you can also say that there's something else going on. In our day and age, we still love color, and he is the most popular artist, probably alive, not alive, but known, and he's the most household name, if not up there with Picasso or something. But there's a story to keep telling, and so in art history, no one wants the stories to end. So it's not like science, whether it's truth or false, and once it's true, you got to build on that, and you should, and it expands things. Art history is more storytelling based on facts, plausible evidence, but also to create in the reader some inspiration and to widen their idea of why that thing was made. And the criteria for that, you say, well, anybody could say anything. Well, yeah. But there's an intense peer review system. So when you go through publishing or when you get a dissertation at a university, people will read it, and since they have authority on that subject matter, and they've already made many, many believable stories that that support the art they're talking about or the time period. Then they're the ones that kind of lead the next group or allow the next group to, profess that this is the truth. Sometimes that's ridiculous because people don't read it. I've gotten peer reviews. I've gotten a review back of my paper that didn't have correct grammar, so I know that they didn't really read it. And that took 6 months, and I took about 6 months to write the paper. But most of the times, people really want to just check that you're doing good work, and you got all your ducks in a row. You know all the facts. You've seen all the work, and you're making statements that are believable. And again, there tends to be this need for panache. This need for it needs to be flavorable. You can't just write black and white, easy to read, simple stuff, and say it's matter of fact. There's something about art history that requires one to, kind of want the stories to continue and to inspire the reader, or at least to expand the idea of why that thing was made. So it's, truth is we're often talking about that at conferences. That's not really true. What you said is, I agree with the facts. Obviously, you've read your stuff, but your interpretation is lacking this, or usually it's, can we add this to it? Most people are pretty sweet about it, but not always. Anyway, and it gets into money because sometimes, if you say a painting was made a certain time and it was this impactful, it can up the price or it can up its popularity in the museum. So it becomes very important that these statements are verified and verified through people. And I'll give it over to the next contestant.
Morning. Good, you responded. That's real nice. Okay. I can't say I really represent the whole field of science, but I do want to tell you what I love about science is that science changes, right? So what we think is happening today may not be what we find out is happening tomorrow. And that makes it a very exciting field because it's not stagnant, right? You're not stopped at a certain place. You get to go on continuously. But the most important premise of science and publication in science, and I, for one, am not someone who talks about scientific truth, because once again, that can change. Because in science, what you need to substantiate what you're doing is called reproducibility. Can someone else take the same critters in the same environment, using the same equipment, the same timing of the experiment, and reproduce those results? You don't just get to do it once. Someone has to look at it again. There has to be many confirmations, and often confirmations from different angles, not exactly the same angle, because then that makes it stronger. So if we see something in biology, it may be that we have to use, of course, our wonderful math and statistics to be able to say, is this really following a protocol? We may have to look at the physical aspect. We may have to look at physics and say, is this obeying the laws of nature as we see them? So it's not just one little area of science. Science is built on a foundation of principles and very deliberate steps in gaining information. A theory in science is very different than a layman's theory. You have made many controlled experiments. You have followed our method, which is called what? What's the method scientists use? It's real difficult to come up with. The scientific method, that's pretty easy, and yeah. So the scientific method is great because it does what? It allows you to make an observation, to see something that's happening, to come up with a hypothesis, to design an experiment, and then look to see if there really is an association. There may be a correlation, but you can't say that one thing directly impacts the other. And that's what we're looking for all the time. So to me, that's terrifically exciting. Sometimes science progresses in leaps and bounds by things that are horrible atrocities in our world. For example, the AIDS virus. When I was teaching at the University of Tennessee, we had an option of either selecting a chapter to have in the textbook or to omit from the textbook because it was such a new area. That area was immunology. Immunology has grown by leaps and bounds because of the AIDS virus and the plague of mankind because of it. But we said this has to be looked at. This has to be looked at carefully. And so now we have a whole other realm of science, and we've learned so much how cells interact with each other, how they interact with critters from the outside, like the virus. That problem presented itself in a way for science to advance. So don't say, I don't accept science. I never use the word believe in science, all right? Because I want you to understand, look at us today. I mean, there are lights. There's warmth in here. There's sound. There's clothing that maybe keeps us a little bit warmer. We have devices to help us see better. You have, what are those little boxes? Anybody in my classes, you have one of those little boxes that you maybe are holding right now and punching things into? I call them the devil's boxes, or they're kind of like Pandora's box, because they have you addicted, right? Talk to me. Because I need to know if Frances has really gone to Walmart, right? Because she may have. She's so excited about it, and I need to find that out. I know you're saying something important, but I really need to confirm that she's there before I listen to you. All right. That was through science, too, that we developed that wonderful technology, and it always has good and bads, but it's important. But I want to show you something. Here's a little journal called Biotechniques. Just came in the mail. I ripped it out of its plastic yesterday. It is the October 2015 edition, and I just began to flip through it. From the editor. Experimental reproducibility continues to be a hot button topic. And then down here in his fourth paragraph, he says, as a journal editor, I'm now being placed in the unfortunate position of policing researchers, forcing them to do validation tests. Oftentimes, Dr. Oz or Prevention Magazine or someone will come up with some anecdotal evidence of something that occurs. And if you go online, you can buy lots of bottles of pills to fix whatever it is that you have wrong with you, because there's all this evidence, right? That's called anecdotal evidence, not scientific evidence. It hasn't been reproduced. There hasn't been real science done. Someone just said, I think this is happening. The unfortunate part of that is that sometimes things present themselves in the news, and because we have these little devil boxes and a wonderful source of media, information gets out very rapidly. Sometimes people jump on that bandwagon. They want to have a reason to explain why they're obese, why they can't lose weight, why their child has autism, why this birth defect occurred in their families, what big brother in business is doing to them to make their life miserable. The unfortunate part of that is then it takes sometimes billions of dollars to do the research to prove that that is false. So if you're a business person, you're thinking about the bottom line, to have to spend billions of dollars to say this is not true is a sad effect sometimes of how we get non-science expressed as science. So once again, critical thinking skills, right? Looking at that and saying, is this really what's happening? If If you take our biology classes, we ask you, interpret this. Look at the data. Do they mix with what the authors are saying? Because sometimes if you look at the data and if you look at the comments or the summaries the authors are making, they don't jive, right? So they're hoping that you don't see the difference in the two. But that's why we want you to use the brain the good Lord gave you, right? It's more than just something with eyeballs to look at the devil box or to put the hat on, right? It's something that you're supposed to use. You're supposed to be critical thinkers. Okay, I'm going to switch to truth in my life, in a sense. That used to be. Experience or discover truth in your own life. One of the fun things about being a teacher is the personal pronoun. I, I, right? I went to chapel this morning. Yes, is that a truth? Did you pay attention in chapel this morning? No, right. Boring people. Okay, good. Thank you very much. See, that was honest. I appreciate that. I want a show of hands right now. Be honest with me. How many of you have your devil box in your hand? Let's see it. Come on. Be honest. What's he going to get you? I'm not going to come out there and pounce on you. You got your devil box in your hand? Very good. You're looking up something, right? This is one of my advisees right up here. Do you see him? This man is so smart. I could talk about his grades, but unfortunately I can't. But he's really, really smart. But what's he doing? He's got a chance to maybe learn something. But what he sees on that devil box is much more enticing, right? It's right there. Okay? I went to chapel, but I looked up stuff the whole time, right? Okay, start with I. I didn't get this paper in on time. I didn't finish that. What you said, your directions were confusing to me. So I didn't finish my paper because I was confused about what I was supposed to do. Start with I. My daughter used to say, the glass just fell off the counter. So I said, let's look at that. Did the glass have little legs? Did it pick up its little glass legs and walk to the edge of the table and say, that's it, I'm over this stuff, and dive off the counter? I know she thinks I'm strange already, but she would look at me like, no. And I'd say, well, then what happened? What really happened? I knocked it off. And I say, great, right? That's true. You knocked it off. Now, did you mean to knock it off? No, didn't mean to knock it off. But start with I. Whatever you do. A wise man once said, when you stop looking within yourself to solve your problems, they'll never be solved. So start with I. Be truthful with yourself.
We have about 15 minutes left, and so what I'll do is actually give people the chance to kind of combine or choose either question 2 or 3, whichever one you'd prefer to answer, just so we can make sure we get a chance to hear again from everyone. So just to remind everyone, question number 2 is about truth in your discipline as far as how you use it. So there's sometimes a difference between what we might say as a discipline as a whole, but how we individually use it. But then also you can discuss in your own experience, your own education, your experience of truth. So go ahead.
I'll be brief. The second question, this might sound bad, but in my philosophy classes, making sure my students get the true answers takes a back seat to other values that I have in my teaching. So as I said before, it's very difficult on the sorts of questions we discuss to figure out with any definitiveness what's true. So I'm more interested in making sure my students ask the right sorts of questions, can make careful distinctions so they're not conflating multiple issues at once, as people tend to do when we think about complicated stuff. And I want my students to be able to reason well and to also be able to anticipate how people who disagree with them would object to their reasoning. And all that stuff is more important in my mind to get my students to do than is to actually figure out what's true on this difficult stuff. And the last question, a life experience that I think gave me an important truth was the truth that my life is really fragile. I learned that about 6 years ago when my wife and I got the surprising news that I had a really big lymphoma tumor in my chest, and that experience forced me to evaluate how I live my life. I tend to be a really anxious person by nature. I get overwhelmed. I get stressed out with my daily responsibilities. By the way, your people have helped me with that in counseling. And even your people, your friends in chemistry, have helped me with that, yeah. But that cancer experience, gave me an opportunity to put things in perspective a bit. Rarely, if ever, do the things on my to-do list, rarely, if ever, are they life or death matters. There's lots of people that want things from me, and rightfully so. I think what I do here at Carson-Newman, for example, is important. I get to do good things, and students expect things of me. My colleagues expect things of me. My bosses expect things of me, and as well they should. And being an anxious person, I can get really easily overwhelmed. But then I have to stop and think, hey, I'm alive, and I'm healthy, and though it might feel like I'm in some sort of real crisis today, I'm not really. Let's think about the fact that my life is fragile and that for another day at least, I get to go home and sit on my couch with my wife and my dog and, watch a television show. So it helps me choose not to take my life for granted, that experience. Now, it's not that I didn't know already that life was fragile and not guaranteed, but I'll end with this. There's a distinction a lot of people will draw between having knowledge and having wisdom. And one way to think of that distinction is to say that to have knowledge to have wisdom is to have knowledge that affects your thought processes in the right sort of way. And I think that's what cancer did for me. I knew that life was fragile, but it didn't really affect the way that I thought about my life. Unfortunately, I have to say that as the years have gone by, that wisdom is harder and harder to hold on to. I tend to the old anxieties seem to take over, and I think that just goes to show that while humans can know a lot of stuff, we're not so good at being wise, really.
So I'm going to answer the second question about how I use truth in my discipline, specifically in my classes and in my research. So I teach Sci 101 and Cognitive Psych, and then I also work as a consultant for the Innocence Project, and so I'll talk about both of these things. So who remembers the dress that happened this spring? Okay, all right. So when we think about the dress, there was this picture. It showed up on Reddit. I wish I had a picture to show you, but I didn't send it to Dr. Dye on time. Okay, but it really caused a huge problem between people. People got into fights over this because they might have seen a blue or black dress. Was that any of you guys? Okay, who saw white and gold? Who was right? I like that answer, both, because it's kind of true. The dress was actually black and blue. Okay, the dress actually was black and blue. So if you saw that correctly, your sensations for that picture matched your perception. So what you actually were wanting to see, what you interpreted. But many of us, including myself, we saw it as a white and a gold dress. And so I use this whenever I talk about sensation perception in my Sci 101 and Cog Sci class, just to show you that the world, right, the world as we see it can change. And it changes based on your experiences. It changes based on what your brain interprets as shadows versus light in the picture, which is actually what caused us to see white versus gold. And so it's just really interesting to think about that example. Previously, I talked about false memories. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about a serious aspect about false memories and how it deals with juror decision-making and eyewitness memory. So my research. Okay, I said I work with the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project works to reduce wrongful convictions. We'd like to think that our legal system is great, right? That we're putting bad guys to jail, but that we're also, working to keep the good guys, the people who actually didn't commit the crimes, that we're working to keep them out of jail as well. Okay, so the Innocence Project works to keep wrongful convictions at a minimum. But what we actually see is that we do wrongfully put people in prison, in jail, based on eyewitness misidentification. Who thinks their memory is perfect? Oh, good. I'm so glad that, at least in here, a lot of people don't trust their own memory, and maybe the false memory list had a little something to do with it. So we see that in over 300 cases that we've worked on with the Innocence Project, over 75% of overturned convictions had an eyewitness testify. And that was the main reason why we put that person to jail. And so what is the offshoot of that? That jurors believed the eyewitness's statement, and the eyewitness believed himself or herself to confidently say, I trusted my memory enough to say that this person did it. This person robbed me. This person assaulted me. This person did X, Y, or Z. And these people might spend years and years of their life in jail wrongfully. Guys, this is a cost to us. We should care about this type of stuff, because guess who pays to keep them there? We do, okay? But not only that, but when someone is wrongfully convicted, what's the true cost to society? The bad guy is still out there. The person who actually sexually assaulted that woman is still walking around, possibly doing that again, right? So we need to educate our jurors. That's another line of research that I work on, right? We can't just trust everything that someone says. And some of you guys, didn't trust your friends, right? When they said, oh, I see black and blue. And you said, no, I see white and gold. That is a good thing. You should always work, to challenge other people's perceptions, challenge what other people say, because truth is very ambiguous. It's such an abstract idea. And when we're dealing with humans, we know that it can be affected in a lot of different ways.
3 minutes. Based on what I said earlier about truth, the criteria of truth in art history being, in the end, somebody else's opinions, right? Because I can't get it published, or if I present a paper somewhere of my ideas, someone has to agree with it, or at least let it go, or listen to it. I've learned that the best way to verify truth, get the best ideas, is be around great people. And I've done that through conferences. Carson-Newman's done a great job of helping me fund conferences, and my wife, we have 2 little kids, allows me to do 2 a year, maybe 3 or 4 if we could get more money. But so I'm building this network of people. And I guess my advice that I've learned from this is make sure you keep up. I should just put it in the first person. I make sure I keep up with people through, sometimes I admit, on my little devil box in my computer. I have a kind of a number 5. Every week send 5 emails off to someone, and for no reason but just to say, hey, what are you doing? I'm doing this. Everything's fine. And I mean to my recommenders, I mean to people that have helped me edit things, people I met at conferences, gallery owners, curators, friends of all sorts. And then when you need something, or you have an opportunity, or need an opportunity, those connections come to you without you even asking them. Let me put it back in the first person. I have learned by this kind of dog-like loyalty, I guess I would call it, to friends and colleagues, is that then you get so many opportunities to do things, and I can't even do them as much. I don't have time, or I can't afford to fly to New York City for a cool conference every 3 weeks in advance. But it's wonderful to have the opportunities. It's actually come from that desire to publish things that requires peer review, meaning people I don't know reading my stuff, saying it's good or bad, and that has encouraged my own kind of personality, which is fairly extroverted usually, to build a network of people. And oftentimes I'm sitting around thinking, just right before I watch a football game or something on the laptop or on the computer, if I have 5 minutes, let me just shoot 5 emails off, or 2 emails to people. And that's something that I didn't think that, I knew networking was a big deal, but living in a small city, I've learned that it is huge to keep up with this. And before you know it, you have like 25 people emailing you back on a somewhat regular basis, giving you opportunities. So giving me opportunities. Anyway, thanks for letting me speak, and that's 3 minutes.
All right, so I think we are pretty much out of time. So I wanted to give a hand to all of our panelists today for sharing with us. So hopefully hopefully everybody learned a little bit about truth that you can now go to your LA 101 classes and talk about, because your professors will be very happy if you talk. So have a great day, everyone.